Some dreams are born in comfort. For others, they're forged through pain. Francis Ngannou's dream wasn't just unlikely. It was fucking impossible. He grew up in extreme poverty. His family had nothing. No electricity, no running water, and by the time he was 10 years old, he was already working in the sand mines, making just $1.50 per day. He became obsessed with fighting. He wanted to be like Mike Tyson. He wanted to be a heavyweight champion. But in a place where kids are forced to drop out of school just to eat, the idea of becoming a world champion isn't just unrealistic, it's laughable. So everyone laughed at him. They all thought he was crazy. He knew it was crazy, but at the same time, he couldn't shake that feeling that it was what he was meant to do. So when he was 26, he made up his mind. He was going to chase his dream or die trying. Ngannou knew that if he wanted a real chance at going pro, he needed to leave Cameroon. He needed to be in a spot where fighters could actually make it. A place where he could learn, train, and market himself as an elite fighter. His North Star was Paris, and his journey there was the craziest shit ever. So keep in mind he's doing this whole thing illegally, right? So most of the journey is in the back of a pickup truck. He also has to cross into Europe here, which is one of the most militarized borders in the world. Oh, and also, if you take a look at this map here, you'd see that to even get to that border, he would have to cross the Sahara Desert. The fucking Sahara Desert, dude. That's insane. Like, look at this, dude. Let's go in a random place in the desert. In the middle of the sand. The fuck? Alright, well, that doesn't make any goddamn sense. Moving on. Getting across the Sahara was gruesome. These were human traffickers, and the only thing they cared about was volume and speed. So Ngannou found himself in the back of a pickup truck with dozens of other migrants, and they were hauling ass, moving as fast as they possibly could to avoid authorities. It took over 24 hours, and by the time it was finally over, Ngannou's arms were destroyed. He was holding onto the truck as hard as he possibly could because he knew that if he let go, he would die instantly. But 24 hours later, he was beyond dehydrated, but he had made it. That drive kills thousands of people per year, and that ended up being the easiest part of his journey to France. Ngannou desperately needed to get into Europe. His future depended on it. His life depended on it. But the Spanish border is one of the most fortified in the world. We're talking about multiple rounds of razor wire, trenches, and guards that will beat you to death if they catch you. It's basically the most fucked up game of cops and robbers in existence, where they do everything in their power to stop you from getting in, but once you're across, you're safe. Except safe, in this example, means being thrown in jail, and getting caught means you'll be left for dead in the Sahara. Yeah, that's what happens if you get caught. They drive out to the middle of the desert and they leave you there. So timing was everything. The only way to successfully cross the border was to be in the right place at the right time, when there's a huge group of migrants already swarming and you can get lost in the crowd. So for months, Ngannou camped out in the forests of Tangier. He was less than 10 miles away from Spain, living in the woods with hundreds of other migrants, all of whom were willing to risk their lives for just the sliver of a chance at a better life. All of them were facing starvation. Their only option was to eat food that was either rotting or found in the garbage. There were only two ways to get into Spain from Tangier: by land or by sea. If you go by sea, you run the very real risk of drowning. The waters are rough, the boats are incredibly fragile, and the Spanish Coast Guard is always patrolling. But if you go by land and try to get into these two Spanish cities, you risk getting torn to shreds by barbed wire or being brutally beaten by guards. That's the route Ngannou chose, and after months of preparing, he finally made a break towards the fences, with hundreds of other migrants from all over the continent. It was mayhem. The guards were everywhere. They were crashing down on the migrants. People were bleeding, screaming, pleading for their lives, but Ngannou made it to the fence, a 20-foot monster with razor wire all over it. He knew he was just 100 feet away from getting out of this hellscape, 100 feet away from changing his life. He quickly scaled the fence, but in a situation like this, plans are non-existent. Bundles of wire laid at the bottom of the fence. All he could do was jump. and moments later, he was captured. The next thing he knew, he was back in the Sahara Desert, 30 miles from any settlement, hungry, beaten, and bleeding. It had all been for nothing. But as Ngannou slowly made his way back towards the forest, he knew he had to try again. There was no other option. Ngannou spent a year trying to get into Spain. He had failed 6 total times. Each attempt brought him to the brink of death, but he was still going. And after 12 months of failed attempts, he only had one option left: the sea. 9 miles of open water, relentless waves, and the ever-looming threat of guards. It was life or death. And disaster struck immediately. Within a mile of launching, Ngannou's raft was struck by a wave and capsized. The 2 people responsible for rowing had been flung from the raft and disappeared. The impossible just got harder. But by a crazy twist of luck or fate or God or astrology or whatever you believe in, they fucking made it. About halfway between Morocco and Spain, they ran into a boat. But it wasn't the Spanish Coast Guard. It was the Red Cross, a rescue ship, and it would be taking them to Europe. After 14 months, 7 failed border crossings, and one of the most dangerous journeys imaginable, he had done it. He was in Europe. No money, no home, no guarantees, but for the first time in his life, there was hope. After 2 months of waiting in a Spanish detention center, he was released. He was free, but homeless. He was broke and he was completely alone in a country where no one spoke his native language. But one thought kept him going: boxing. When Ngannou finally arrived in Paris, things didn't magically get easier for him. He was still homeless and struggling to eat. He was still alone. But on day 1 of being in Paris, he found a place to train. And there, he met a guy named Didier Carmon. Anyways, he was the coach of a local MMA gym, and he was blown away by Ngannou's story. He wanted him to become an MMA fighter. He knew that with his size, power, and work ethic, Ngannou was made for it. All he needed was a little bit of training. So they made a deal. If Ngannou did MMA instead of boxing, Carmon would train him for free and give him a roof over his head. It was the first time in Ngannou's life that someone had truly believed in him. And from that moment on, he would fight. Ngannou's story isn't just about fighting. It's about refusing to accept the life that he was given. It's about risking everything for a dream that no one else can understand. He could have stayed in Cameroon, working in the mines, living a life that was already decided for him, but he didn't. He did the scariest thing you could ever do. He chose the unknown, the impossible. And because of that choice, his life changed forever. The truth is, Ngannou isn't different from anyone else. Everyone has a dream. The difference is that Ngannou took action. He bet on himself when no one else would. And that's the real lesson. It's not about fighting. It's not about the UFC. It's about believing in something so much that you're willing to risk the pain of failure, rejection, or even your own survival to make it real. So the question isn't whether or not dreams are possible. It's how far are you willing to go for yours?